Picture this. It's 12,300 years ago. You're sitting by a fire in the middle of what is now the Utah desert. You've had a long day. You hunted some birds, you cooked them. Your feet hurt, and you're tired in the specific way that only happens after a day of doing something physically exhausting outdoors. And then someone in your group pulls out a small wild plant and starts doing something with it that would eventually, thousands of years later, become the most commercially profitable and deadly habit in all of human history. They weren't wearing a leather jacket. They didn't have a vending machine. But they were, in their own way, about to light up. And here's the thing that nobody tells you when they talk about ancient humans and smoking. This was not a recent discovery. This habit did not start when Europeans showed up with ships and curiosity. This goes back so much further than that. So far back, in fact, that the answer to the question of when humans started smoking changes almost everything you think you know about addiction, ritual, and why you still step outside in the cold for 5 minutes to stare at nothing. Let's start with what we actually found, because the evidence here is genuinely wild. In 2021, a team of archaeologists, led by Daron Duke of the Far Western Anthropological Research Group, published a paper in Nature Human Behavior announcing something that rewrote the history books. At a site in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert, they found 4 tiny charred seeds of a wild tobacco plant in the remains of a fireplace that was 12,300 years old. Not a pipe, not a label that said tobacco. Just 4 burned seeds sitting in ash next to some bird bones and stone tools, on the edge of what used to be marshland during the end of the Ice Age. And that's it. That's the oldest direct evidence of human tobacco use ever found. Before that discovery, the record was held by a 3,300-year-old smoking pipe from Alabama, with nicotine residue inside it. So we just pushed the history of human tobacco use back by 9,000 years, in one dig, in a desert. Now, nobody knows exactly what those early humans were doing with the tobacco. They might have been chewing it. They might have been adding it to some kind of plant bundle and sucking on it. It's also entirely possible they were burning it and inhaling the smoke. Duke himself told reporters, and I love this quote, that seeing them fireside, using tobacco, we can pretty readily imagine what they were getting out of it. That is a very polite academic way of saying they were getting a buzz. 12,300 years ago, a hunter-gatherer sat by a fire somewhere in what is now Utah, discovered that this particular plant made them feel a certain way, and thought, I'm going to do that again. Congratulations. You just witnessed the birth of a habit that now kills about 8 million people per year globally. But tobacco isn't even the only ancient smoke story here. Let's talk about the other one, because this one has an even better archaeological reveal. In 2019, researchers from the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History and the Chinese Academy of Sciences published a study in Science Advances about a site called Jirzhankal Cemetery, 3,000 meters up in the Pamir Mountains of Western China, along what would eventually become the ancient Silk Road. They found 10 wooden braziers, essentially small incense burners, in 8 burial tombs, dating back around 2,500 years. The braziers had been used to burn plant material over heated stones. When the team analyzed the chemical residue inside, they found cannabis, specifically cannabis with unusually high levels of THC. The researchers concluded that these ancient people weren't just accidentally burning a plant that happened to be nearby. They were selecting for the plants that had the strongest psychoactive effect, and burning them deliberately during funeral ceremonies. So the first clear evidence we have of humans getting high on cannabis is from a mountain funeral 2,500 years ago, where somebody apparently decided that grief was best processed with chemistry. We still do this, we just call it a wake. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and where you should resist the urge to check your phone for a second. Because you might be tempted to think of these ancient humans as doing something primitive, something we've since cleaned up and moved past. But that framing is exactly backwards. These people weren't discovering intoxicants by accident and then stumbling into addiction out of ignorance. They were deliberately, thoughtfully, ritually engaging with psychoactive plants as part of organized social and spiritual life. Shannon Tushingham, an anthropologist at Washington State University, has argued that tobacco's pull on humans is the result of thousands of years of coevolution between the plant and people, not just biological addiction, an actual relationship. And Elisa Guerra Doche, a researcher at the Universidad de Valladolid in Spain, has documented evidence across prehistoric European sites that the consumption of mind-altering substances was an integral part of prehistoric belief systems, often specifically tied to communicating with the spiritual world. So these weren't people who couldn't help themselves. They were people who had decided, as a community, that certain plants opened certain doors that were worth opening. We will get to why this matters for your Thursday evening glass of wine, but first let's stay in the ancient world for one more moment. The thing that keeps showing up across all of these sites, across all of these continents, is that smoking and intoxicant use was almost never casual in the ancient world. It was structured. Tobacco, in many indigenous American traditions, was treated as one of the four sacred medicines. In woodland Indian culture, it was considered the primary thread of communication between humans and the spirit world. The Lakota used specially made pipes called chanupa wakan in ceremonies, passing them in specific directions as offerings. The Ojibwe buried tobacco in front of homes to honor water and earth spirits. The Cree burned it during storms to calm the skies. This was not a habit. This was a technology for crossing the boundary between the ordinary world and something beyond it. The smoke itself was the message. It carried your prayers upward. It was not something you did behind a gas station. And then, of course, Europeans arrived in the Americas and found this elaborate, ancient, ceremonial relationship with tobacco and thought, we could sell that. By 1600, tobacco was being shipped across the Atlantic in massive quantities. By 1700, it was the economic engine of the American colonial project. By 1900, cigarette machines could produce 120,000 cigarettes per day. By 2025, about 1 billion people on Earth smoke tobacco. The plant that a hunter-gatherer used next to a fire in Utah 12,300 years ago has killed more people than every war in history combined. The Ojibwe burned it to calm storms. Philip Morris turned it into a quarterly earnings report. So here's the thing you should take away from all of this. That image we started with, the one of the person by the fire in the Utah desert, tired after a long day of chasing birds across a marsh, reaching for a plant that would make them feel better for a few minutes. That's not some primitive ancestor doing something we've outgrown. That is an experience that 1 billion people on Earth are having right now. Today, this morning, in different form but for functionally identical reasons. The craving for relief, the ritual of the break, the specific chemistry of stepping away from the world for a moment and returning slightly altered. Archaeologist Daron Duke put it best when he told reporters, intoxicants are a necessity of life. People imbibe these things. Think of your morning cup of coffee. Why shouldn't people back then have done it? And here's the real answer to the question we opened with. When did ancient humans start smoking? Based on what we've found, at least 12,300 years ago. But the honest answer is probably much earlier than that, because we only find evidence when it gets preserved. Most of it doesn't. Every fireplace that didn't survive, every chewed plant that left no trace, every moment of ancient relief that was too ordinary to leave a mark. The seeds we found in Utah survived because the marshland dried up and the desert preserved them. Imagine everything we haven't found yet. We didn't invent the urge to step outside and take a breath. We just changed what we breathe. This video discusses anthropological and archaeological research for educational purposes. Modern hunter-gatherer observations are used as comparative models to understand ancient human behavior, not as definitive proof of how all ancient humans lived across different time periods and geographies.